Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Vicki Zabo. I am the Butler Municipal Alliance Coordinator. I'm also the Student Assistance Counselor at Butler High School. And we just wanted to thank you all tonight for coming to our Suicide is Preventable presentation. Thank you to Mayor Martinez and Christine Wilson and Luis Rodriguez at the Butler Public Library for making this happen. I am proud to present to you Ema Dias. She is from the Mental Health Association of Morris and I believe Essex counties, and I will let her share a little bit more about herself. And once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Victoria, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ema Dias. I'm actually filling in for Tracy today. Tracy is the director of our suicide prevention program at MHA. So we were once the Mental Health Association of Essex and Morris, and now just MHA, which can get confusing. So just the Mental Health Association. But I also work with a suicide prevention program. I work as a community educator. So really what we do with suicide prevention is we do what we're doing tonight. We go out to schools, we talk to parents, we talk to staff, and we talk to students, and we really just focus on educating the community on the signs and symptoms of depression, the warning signs for suicide, and all the different statistics, myths, and facts. I'll also share that I am a licensed counselor as well as a registered art therapist. So this topic is something that was always interesting to me. So I'm really happy to be working with the suicide prevention program. And I'm excited to be with you guys tonight. So today we're really focusing just on how to notice when a youth in particular is struggling. And you'll find that a lot of the things that we talk about as far as warning signs are not just specific to youth. They really can be applied to adults and people of all ages. But there are some other things that we've noticed in trends with youth. And we try to stay as up to date as possible with statistics to bring you guys factual information. So the story, the video I'm about to play, which let's get into that, is a story about a boy named Hayden. Hayden unfortunately lost his life to suicide right early in the pandemic, like in the early lockdown stages. And this video is called Almost 13 because it was just 4 days, I believe, right before his 13th birthday. So he was young. The video is going to share a little bit about what was going on. And then I think the foundation is called Hayden's Hope or Hayden's Corner. And that's a foundation that his family has made in his honor to really focus on educating, particularly parents and caregivers, on how we can take notice of these warning signs and how to do something about it, how to have that conversation. So at the beginning of the video, there is a disclaimer about suicide being a heavy topic. So if it is triggering for everyone, feel free to give yourself some time and space. We are skipping over a chunk of it because it's an extensive video. Feel free to look it up on YouTube later.
The following contains discussion of suicide, which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Hayden. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
We've had 2 5-year-olds in our clinic who were suicidal. So my experience with suicide has been with children as young as 5. It is unimaginable to think of a child killing themselves. I think parents cannot imagine it. And so that's probably one of the reasons a lot of parents don't want to talk to their children about suicide, because they can't even imagine their child being exposed to it or even themselves having that kind of impulse. Young people, tend to not have the kind of resources that adults do, whether it's internal or external. They don't have the life experience to know that they'll make it through a breakup or having disappointed somebody. And we don't know what happened with Hayden exactly, but I think it's interesting that he was so scared of disappointing his dad and disappointing his family that he did something to escape from that situation. We have to have those difficult conversations and do it a safe way. Not talking about explicit means, but talking about just the idea of suicide. And if things got so bad that you'd want to kill yourself or you'd think about harming yourself, what could we do in that moment? I would want to know, I think letting them know that no matter what happens, you would never want them to harm themselves. And that it will be okay, we will figure it out. But in that moment, what can you do? Come get mommy and daddy, you reach out to a trusted adult, do something to distract, to delay, to soothe yourself in that moment until you can get somebody to come in and kind of help you with that situation.
I've attempted suicide about 5 or 6 times. The first time I attempted suicide, I was probably around Hayden's age.
He should talk to somebody. If he were be thinking about that, he should have talked to somebody.
It's not a joke. If you're feeling serious about it, get help. There's always the hotlines that people can call. Call one of them if you don't feel comfortable. It's anonymous.
Didn't tell anyone I did it, didn't get any help after that. I wonder if getting the help at that younger age would have helped me now.
Step one is you gotta have a conversation, a very frank conversation. Don't be afraid to talk about it.
We have to use the word suicide. We have to use it as early as you would start talking about feelings, or you would be talking about, ways of behaving, like expectations of behavior in school. You would also talk about, well, if somebody hurts your feelings, I'm going to expect you to talk to me about that. I want to know what you're thinking. I don't want you to hold it in. There are a lot of families who are actually resolving a lot of family conflict. They're actually spending a lot of good family time together, having these deep conversations. This is an opportunity for families to really talk about things that maybe are unexplored.
In Hayden's case, I think if he has a few more skills, that when that life's perfect storm of all this stuff happens, maybe he makes a different decision. You gotta talk. You gotta have conversations. Conversations matter.
So you can see in Hayden's case, and in all cases of suicide, with Hayden's Corner in particular, their message is that conversations matter. So that talking about suicide is important. And I always say when I do these presentations that for a lot of people, even saying the word suicide or hearing the word suicide, it's not something they're used to. And for some people, it's even uncomfortable. So we're really going to be breaking the ice tonight, because I will say suicide a handful of times. And before I move forward with talking about some statistics, I also wanted to talk about just some language. So you'll hear me say died by suicide or lost their life to suicide instead of saying committed suicide. So this is something that's important to be mindful of. We don't want anyone to be looked at as a criminal for attempting suicide or for dying by suicide. So we say die by suicide, lost their life to suicide. You can say that they killed themselves. It's a little bit more vulgar, but it's more appropriate than committed suicide. When we say suicide survivors, it can get a little confusing. Sometimes we're talking about the person who has attempted suicide and still lives. But we don't want to say unsuccessful or successful suicide, because there's never a successful suicide. So why would we consider an unsuccessful one? So we can talk about suicide attempts or someone who has survived a suicide attempt, but sometimes you'll also hear us say suicide survivors to refer to the family members of the people who still live after the person has died by suicide. So some statistics, sorry for the word jumble. So suicide is currently the second leading cause of death among young people, 10 to 24. So we use the New Jersey's Chief Examiner's Office for statistics. You can actually go onto the website and go on their dashboard, and they have statistics for a number of things, but they are updating these daily. So at the time, it's the second leading cause And I will say for New Jersey, while it's the third leading cause in New Jersey, so second across the country, New Jersey has some of the lowest numbers for suicide across the country. I believe it was in 2019, we were the state with the lowest numbers. Not really sure why that is, but nonetheless, we still have statistics and the statistics continue to exist. So 53 suicides have happened this year under the age of 25. So we typically consider young adults up until the age of 25. So it's still young people losing their lives. 16 suicides were just in Warren County since the beginning of 2023. So that's not just looking at youth, that's, you know, all suicides of all ages. On average, this is from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, there are about 130 suicides per day. So it's quite a large number. Again, that's focused on United States numbers, but nonetheless a frightening number. In 2020, almost 46,000 Americans died by suicide. 6,000 of them were between the ages of 15 to 24. So again, we're looking at younger populations. Suicide are more frequent in girls than in boys. So if you were to look at the numbers of suicides and separated by gender, you would see that boys or men are more likely to die by suicide, whereas women or girls are more likely to attempt suicide. The reasoning behind that is because men typically choose more lethal methods of suicide, so guns, jumping off cliffs, or stepping into traffic, things like that, whereas women are more likely to, again, this isn't a blanket statement, but they're more likely to try to overdose, which can be a mathematical equation, sometimes depending on what substances they're trying to use to actually take a lethal dose, or even drowning or monoxide poisoning, which are typically people walk in and are able to save them before they die, thankfully. So that's always a trend that has continued over the years, that girls are more likely to attempt suicide while men and boys are more likely to die by suicide. Guns are the most used weapon of choice for suicide, followed by asphyxiation and then overdosing. 1 out of 6 students in grades 9 through 12 have seriously considered suicide in the last year. So there was a study done throughout the pandemic that looked at students specifically in high school and how they were feeling, their feelings about going to school, their feelings about themselves. And many of them, as you see, 1 out of 6 talked about considering suicide. And I think an even larger number talked about feeling down most days rather than feeling up or in a good mood. More youth die by suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS. Again, it's the second leading cause across the country, third in our state. I just read that one. And each day in our nation, there are an average of over 3,000, so close to 4,000 attempts by young people. And we'll talk about that. Oh, no, my cursor's not working. Okay. So some myths and facts, and then I'll just say, I'm sure we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this, but if at any point, if people want to throw questions or comments into the chat, or I see that there's a Q&A option, feel free. And if they're relevant at the time, I'll definitely discuss them. If not, we'll save them for the end. So some myths and facts. One is that we don't have to worry about suicide in young kids and teens. And this is a myth because we see, I mean, you've heard in Hayden's story, Hayden was just 12, about to turn 13, and he was struggling with these ideas and ultimately died by suicide. So it's something that's worth talking about. Again, I always tell people that the idea of death is not uncommon. Many people think about death in passing. You know, you see something crazy happen on the parkway or on your drive home, and you're like, if someone was standing there, like that person would have died. So the thought of death or of yourself dying is not uncommon. It's when it becomes persistent. And for us to believe that kids aren't thinking about that is doing more harm than good. So it's really important to open up those conversations. A lot of people believe that by talking about suicide, that you're putting the idea of suicide in someone's head. And I believe this is what the woman in the video was getting to. Her point was that talking about suicide is not going to give someone the idea. It's not going to give them the materials or the information they need to go out with a plan for suicide. And in fact, a lot of people, when you talk about suicide, not only do you give, especially if we're thinking about young kids, I'm talking about like young school age kids from 5 to 10. Sometimes suicide is the first when they hear about suicide, it's never really from parents. So when we talk about it, we give them information and we let them know that there's help and that there's people to talk to. And for young adults or adolescents or even youth who are thinking about suicide, when you ask, do you have thoughts about suicide, or are you thinking about killing yourself? You're often giving them the permission to finally say what's on their mind rather than continue holding it in. And it often opens up conversation pathways rather than shutting doors. Kids and teens who talk about suicide are not in real danger. Again, I think we have, or there's a societal idea that, you know, kids have nothing to worry about, or they might not have access to means to take out a plan for suicide. But again, the reality is that they are in danger of suicide. We've seen the numbers, and suicide is preventable. So we are able to keep this from continuing to happen, at least in the large numbers that we see. And kids and teens who fail in attempts at suicide are not in real danger. They were not really trying to kill themselves. We do know that having a history for mental illness as well as suicide attempts heightens the risk of a person trying again. Again, if a person's suicide, I shouldn't say again, this is the first time I'm saying it. If a person's suicidal once, it doesn't mean that they're going to be suicidal for the rest of their lives. Everyone really has a different journey, but we also can't assume that just because a person was suicidal once, they made an attempt, they weren't able to take out their plan, or, you know, they didn't die, that they will no longer try again. And again, this is false. It's likely that they're still thinking about it, especially if they haven't had time to process it or haven't been reassured that they are supported or connected to any type of treatment or services. So how can we prevent suicide? So for one, giving people feelings of hope. So when someone is going through a hard time, especially kids and young kids, instead of diminishing or minimizing their struggles or what they're dealing with at home, at school, with their friends, continuing to support them and giving them those feelings of hope. Coping skills is a huge conversation in and out of schools. I know so many schools talk about SEL now, social emotional learning, and coping skills are really starting to be talked about a lot at home, which is great to see because that's the best place for them to learn how to cope with their emotions. Treatment for depression, so just having access to it, knowing about it, and kind of destigmatizing it. I'm sorry if you hear the bells, my dog is begging for attention, very literally. Preventing access to lethal means. So whether that is if you are a firearm owner, making sure that firearms are securely and safely put away and that only you as the owner have access to them. If you are worried about teens in your home, or anyone in your home, I should say, making sure that access to drug and alcohol is limited, if not completely removed, even thinking about prescription medications and over-the-counter medications. Again, sometimes it's typically a little bit of a math problem to figure out what the lethal dose is, but there are lethal doses of all medications. And there was another one I was going to say. Oh, sharp objects. If you have someone who has attempted suicide in the past and you know that they are still having these thoughts and they're still struggling with their mental health and their mental illness, removing any type of sharp objects or anything that they can hurt themselves with. Healthy habits, a big conversation that's been going on in the mental health world, especially since the pandemic, is the mind-body connection. If you're treating your body well, and if you're exercising, going outside and doing all the things to take care of your physical self, it is likely to also benefit your mental self, as well as doing extra things to take care of your mental well-being, whether that is going to therapy, talking about it, journaling, and we'll talk about some coping skills later as well. Connection and support to teens and trusted adults, or not teens, but peers. So a support system is one of the best protective factors for any person, young or old, regardless of their mental health, whether they have great mental health or they're struggling with their mental health. Having connection in a support system is the best protective factor. And for youth, the best protective factor, the number one protective factor, is having an adult in their life that they trust, whether that is a parent, a teacher, a coach, the bus driver, the crossing guard, a best friend's parent, just anyone that they can go to and say, like, this is what's going on and this is what I'm feeling. And that person is either able to take action or at least let someone else know what's going on so someone can take action. And then, of course, knowing the risk factors, which we're getting to in a moment. So some risk factors. Again, I just mentioned having previous suicidal attempts as well as an existing mental illness. This does not mean that if you are diagnosed with a mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, what have you, doesn't mean that you will be suicidal. It does not mean that you will have a suicide attempt, but having an existing mental illness certainly worsens or heightens the risk of attempting or having suicidal thoughts. Social isolation, again, connection is a big protective factor. Already having substance use, or later we'll talk about warning signs if you see an increase in substance use, whether it's drugs or alcohol, and then self-injury. So there used to be a myth that a person who engages in self-harm, whether it's cutting themselves, burning themselves, pulling hair out, all that kind of stuff, that they would be less likely to attempt suicide because they get their relief or the adrenaline rush from self-harm. And there certainly are people who engage in self-harm who say that they get some type of relief or they give physical feeling to an internal pain. But just because someone is engaging in self-harm or they self-injure, it does not mean that they will not attempt suicide. Sometimes it's often a precursor. So again, we never want to just assume and null out options. You want to talk about it. We want to learn more. We want to understand, and we want to get help. Relationship factors. So adverse childhood experience, ACEs. So whether that is some type of abuse or neglect, having a split family or a single parent family, being a child of divorce. There's lots of different ACEs. You can actually look them up online. There's a little test, and sometimes you'll even be surprised how many ACEs you have in your life as a child. Loss, whether that's loss of a family member, this can be loss of a home. They can lose friendships. They can lose schools if they switch schools. Experiencing bullying, family history of suicide or family history of mental illness, and having a family or peer conflict. Now, this does not mean that any person who is experiencing bullying or had an adverse childhood experience, it's never cause and effect, but it's certainly worth, again, checking in on people, paying attention to their behaviors. And we'll talk about protective factors and coping skills. So when you notice the kids in your life going through things, that you know what to do instead of trying to decide whether or not they are susceptible of suicide. It's better just to have a conversation and check in. Community and societal factors, whether it's barriers to healthcare, the stigma about talking about mental illness or being open about it, having access to lethal means, unsafe media portrayals of suicide. I've done some focus groups with youth over this year, and the ages ranged from about 18 to about 22. And all of them talked about how social media, they believe that social media is such a detriment to their mental health. And the biggest reason why, at least from what they were telling me, is that because they're constantly comparing themselves to one another. So I don't want to make social media the devil, because I think there's some pros, but right now there's definitely a lot of influencers who portray these glorious and luxurious images of self, and we're finding that youth are constantly trying to chase after these images and are then hurting themselves emotionally, and knowing that they cannot surmount, or thinking that they cannot surmount, thinking that they can never do that, thinking that they are not worthy of the same love and attention that they see these influencers get. And then systemic trauma, whether it's through racism, sexism, and all the different discriminatory and marginalizing factors that we experience now in society. So, like I mentioned, the biggest protective factor is having a caring adult, a trusted adult in their life, a youth being able to talk to someone and say, this is what's going on, this is what I'm feeling, what do I do? Like all those kinds of questions. It's so important. And for some people, it is a parent. And for others, maybe the parent isn't the first person, but at least I believe that if a child can at least have a person in their life, that whoever that person is, the parent's going to be the next one. So parents are always going to be in the loop, but we have to make sure that we build that trust so that kids are coming to parents first rather than looking to other people in their life. So typical behaviors versus potential warning signs. So I think one thing we have to address is the fact that youth, especially going through their adolescent, preteen, teenage years, there's a lot going on emotionally, physically, hormonally, socially. They're going through changes all around in their life. So erratic behavior is normal. It's part of normal development to be sometimes unreasonably angry or to throw fits and temper tantrums beyond the appropriate age. This is normal and it happens. And some people work through it better than others. So we have to notice when these normal behaviors become warning signs. So a teenager not really wanting to spend time with parents because they'd rather be with their friends is normal. It's developmentally normal for us to stray away from our parents or want to create a barrier to individualize ourselves. And so we look to our friends, we look to our peers. What's not normal, what's a warning sign, is when they remove themselves from everyone in their lives. Especially if you have someone with extracurriculars, with sports, you know, they go to friend's house, they go to grandma and grandpa's house, they, you know, they do all these things. And if they suddenly don't want to engage with any of those people and completely withdraw, that's the difference. That's the warning sign. Having a temper tantrum every now and then, again, pretty normal for 12, 13, 14, sometimes even 15 and 16-year-olds. But frequently arguing with adults or friends, breaking rules, just really defiant and aggressive behavior, that's when we're looking at warning signs. For youth, oftentimes a sign of depression is actually irritability, aggression, and anger, whereas in adults we see more of that sadness and grief and low mood. But for young people, for adolescents, especially boys, anger and aggression come out first. It's just their manifestation of the feeling. So again, you have to keep an eye out for those warning signs and be able to talk through them to know what's the difference. Moving from childhood likes into teen pursuits, completely normal. Losing interest in their favorite activities, this can be music, it can be art, it can be sports, theater, what have you, when they've completely decided to disengage and no longer want to be a part of it or associated with it, this can be a sign of isolation and a warning sign for suicide. And then sometimes struggling to complete a task. Again, normal, especially if it's a task they don't want to do. It's normal for them to start the task and not want to continue it or to forget about it and walk away from it. But being unable to remain focused on anything and maintaining concentration, whether it's in a conversation, in class, while they're actually completing a task, homework, dishes, whatever it is, that can be more of a sign of depression and suicide rather than just typical behavior. So we talked about isolation. Personality changes can also be a big, warning sign. When I was doing counseling with families, families who have a family member with mental illness, one of the family members, their son was going through a lot. He had just been recently diagnosed with schizophrenia. But before that, he had made a suicide attempt. Two, actually. One, they walked in on him when he was trying to hang himself, and the second time he had tried to run into oncoming traffic. And they said that they were so upset with themselves because they didn't notice the behavior changes, the personality changes. And, you know, that anger with yourself is completely normal, but there's ways to work through this because it's not a parent's fault. I'll say this again later, but I know we have a lot of parents here tonight. So I want to remind the parents that it's not your fault if things like this happen. But they talked about, as they were processing all these emotions and their story and telling me their story, they began to notice the warning signs that they did miss, the warning signs that no one really thought something of. And they talked about, you know, how he didn't want to join the football team his senior year of high school, but they thought that he was just grown out of it, that he was going to go to college and he was going to get interested in something else. They talked about how he really didn't play the video games that he normally played anymore, but they said, you know, we were actually kind of happy he didn't like playing video games anymore. So who were we to complain? So the different personality and behavior changes, they may seem subtle in like at first, but when I always say you have to notice a pattern of change. If an interest is being replaced with another interest and they seem to continue to be happy and content, motivated and thriving, then, you know, people change their mind, you change interests, it's a normal part of life. But when they completely disengage and they become difficult to talk to, they really don't want to discuss anything anymore, that's when you have to really be more worried about a warning sign. Giving away prized possessions, this is really common, especially in older populations, but it can be common no matter what. Giving away things that they really enjoy or things that they've held personal to them, or even sending text messages or leaving voicemails along the lines of like, you know, whatever happens to me, just thank you for everything you do. I love you so much. Or and an example that we give to youth when we talk to them about warning signs of suicide, there's a video that we play, and the text message that a girl sent to her friend was, Her friend checked in on her. Are you okay? I haven't seen you in a couple days at school. And she said, don't worry, soon you won't have to worry about me anymore. So again, this idea that they're removing themselves from the equation. A changing in routine, an increase or the beginning, the onset of a substance use, agitation, anger, I talked about already, anxiety and worry. This is something that you might hear more expression of rather than them isolating, but they might talk about being worried about things that, maybe they hadn't been worried before about. They're worried about being a burden. They're worried about what people will think and say about every little thing that they do. They're worried about peers' reactions to things. They're worried about teachers' reactions to things. Again, someone being a teenager being worried about what their friends think about their clothes or the activities they do, normal. But this constant worry and the expression of this worry can be a much different thing. Poor hygiene is something that we always talk about. So, just that could always be a sign of depression. And even if you ever notice a young person and it's 90 degrees outside and they're wearing long sleeve shirts all summer long, this can be a sign that they're hiding their self-injury marks along their arms. So especially if they're dressing inappropriately for warm weather, typically, not super uncommon, especially wearing sweatpants and sweatshirts is a trend right now. But if they're constantly wearing and they won't take it off despite how hot and sweaty they get, that can be more of a sign that they're hiding something. And then being bored with school, work, whatever's going on in their lives. This mouse is being really delayed today. So talking to your teen, again, this was the message that Hayden's Corner was trying to get out, that the conversations matter. And these conversations are difficult, but talking to your teen nonetheless is important. So I recommend just talking to your teen as much as you can, even if it's the 5-minute car ride from school to home or wherever you're going, but asking them questions and asking them open-ended questions. So allowing them to decide which direction the conversation goes in, deciding if they, and then, sorry, backtrack, deciding how they want to answer rather than asking yes or no answers, or, how was school today? School was good. What did you do? I did stuff. So asking about like, hey, I heard that you mentioned last night that you had a math test. How did that go? What kind of questions were on it? So being really more engaged and having those open-ended questions. Again, I understand that teenagers don't always want to talk, but if you continuing leaving yourself open to these conversations, eventually the subliminal message gets through to them that you're the person who's going to be there to talk when you're ready to talk. Don't rush to solve their problems. Again, as a parent, this is instinctual. A child mentions that they're struggling in math class and you're immediately thinking about tutors, who do you sit next to in class? Are you distracted? Are you having trouble with the homework? Is it the teacher style? Instead of asking like, well, what do you find difficult about it? I feel like last year you really enjoyed math. What's changed this year? Asking questions that, again, are going to allow them to express and explain themselves rather than problem solving or even sometimes minimizing. I think that when kids say they have a rough day at school and their biggest problem is that their friend didn't want to sit next to them at lunch, from an adult's perspective, it seems minor, it seems petty. But for them, that's their entire life. They spend so much time at school. So these little things that happen to them at school can really affect them. So keeping in or checking in on them, keeping track of what's going on in their life as much as possible, so then you can ask those questions and you can express interest and you can continue to, get more information rather than minimizing and letting them know that, it's not that big of a deal or you have bigger problems to deal with. And then again, being available. So by having these conversations day to day, and then when you have to have the bigger conversations about feelings, emotions, mental health, and suicide, that it's already normal for you to check in and ask and to, sit at a table or sit in the car and talk about these things. So when we're asking about suicide, again, this can be an uncomfortable conversation. And when I do presentations, typically to teachers, but I'm realizing it's still good advice for any adult who interacts with kids in any capacity, that it's better to be open and transparent than to pretend that we are the adults in the room who know everything and we're experts and we got it all under control. So if you're uncomfortable or even emotional about asking about suicide, if you're worried about a child in your life, a young person in your life, it's okay to tell them like, hey, like this is a really hard conversation for me, but I want to check in on you because I'm worried about you. So being transparent, asking direct questions is the biggest thing when you're worried about suicide specifically. When we ask a young person or anyone really, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or do you wish you would wake up or go to sleep and never wake up again? These are a little encrypted, and the answers to them might not be what you're actually looking for. So asking someone, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Well, the answer could be no, because maybe they aren't thinking about hurting themselves. Maybe they're thinking of, drinking a bottle of vodka and taking grandma's over-the-counter pills or her prescription pills. So that's not really hurting yourself in the traditional sense, but still a thought about suicide nonetheless. Or they might not have gotten to the point where they're actually thinking about suicide, but maybe they're thinking more that they're just a burden in everyone's life, that they have no purpose being here, that they are better off dead than alive. So your questions have to be explicit in order to get explicit answers. And once we get explicit answers, once we get a yes or no, are they thinking about suicide? Are they thinking about killing themselves? Are we able to move forward and talk about what's going on? How long have they had these thoughts for? So tips for getting teens to talk. I think this is something I know my parents struggled talking to me when I was young. I see it with my younger cousins, and I work with enough kids and families to know that this is something that's going to be existing forever. Teens don't always want to talk. They're moody and they feel like adults don't understand them or don't care about the same things they care about. So again, normal behavior. But how do we get them to talk? So having teen-led families, again, anything that is going to be a routine or part of the daily or weekly schedule is going to give them a place that they know, like, for me, it was Sunday dinners. So when we were at the table on Sunday, like everything and anything came out. And sometimes it was absolute chaos, but at least the conversations were happening. Playing games. So kind of distracting them with something that they enjoy, whether it's a board game, a video game, going out somewhere, doing things that they enjoy and that will kind of open them up naturally. We'll get them talking about just everything in their life, and eventually you'll be able to get a peek into what's going on, or maybe open up for another question, a more serious question if that's what's on your mind. If the subject comes up in a movie or a TV show, it's definitely worth, you can do it at the moment while you're sitting on the couch, or maybe the next time you guys are together, say, hey, that movie or that show, whatever that we watched the other night, how did you feel when they were talking about that person struggling with depression, or how did it make you feel when they showed the example of suicide? Sometimes for kids, seeing it on social media or in a movie or in a TV show, whatever it is the first time that they even consider the thought of suicide, and they're like, so this is real. This is something that happens. And then, so at least you're able to have a conversation. So even if they're not having suicidal thoughts, you have the window to say, if you ever think about this, I'm here for you. Or if you ever want to talk about it, I'm ready to talk. Or if you have questions, like, where to find me. So just allowing it to open up the conversation rather than letting it close a door and making it something that's taboo and no one talks about. Taking a drive, if that's something that you normally do with your child, continuing the conversation or having multiple mini conversations, again, figuring out what's most comfortable to you, what feels natural, and what's going to work with the young person in your life. Because let's face it, everyone's different. Some kids are open and they have so much to say about everything, and others are a little bit closed off and they kind of need to get warmed up to a conversation topic before they're really able to share what they're saying, or what they're thinking rather. And enlist other trusted adults. Again, developmentally, it is completely normal for youth to want to create distance between themselves and parents. We've all gone through some form of this at some point in our life where we wanted to be ourselves and we didn't want to be in our parents' shadow. So getting to know the other adults in your child's life, again, whether it's a coach, the school social worker, a therapist, the school nurse, bus drivers, whoever is in their life, getting to know who those people are so that you also have a form of communication with that person. If you ever are worried, you can check in with them, or at least know that your child has someone else to talk to if they're not going to come talk to you. Gotta move this thing here. Okay, so what not to say. So I talked already about not diminishing or minimizing their problems. despite if you feel like it's a minor problem or something that can be easily fixed. It's not helpful to them to be like, oh, well, that's no big deal. So saying that this is nothing, or that by next week you'll forget about it, or just telling them you have so much to be thankful for. Starting the conversation off, just validating that this sounds so difficult, or I can hear that you're in a lot of pain and I want to know how I can help you, or even asking them like, do you want to talk about it with me? Are you comfortable talking about this? Allowing them to guide the conversation. Definitely saying, don't worry, everything will be all right, because again, for them in that moment, this is everything, the struggles they're going through, the thoughts they have racing through their mind. It is their entire existence. So to just brush it off and pretend that it's not a problem is going to be likely that they close themselves off and hold more in. Or telling them that, think about your family, how your family would feel if you killed yourself. I promise you, if a child is having suicidal thoughts, they're already thinking about how their death or how their life affects their family. They're already feeling like a burden, and they're already considering that their family would be better off without them. So to, try to guilt them about the thoughts of suicide is definitely not going to be helpful. So that, I feel like I talked really fast. So please, if anyone has questions or needs me to repeat anything, let me know. So these next two slides are about the programs that we do in schools. So Gizmo for mental health. Gizmo's the name of that sweet little dog on the screen. So Gizmo is the main character in a book, Gizmo's Possum Guide to Mental Health. And we do this program with 3rd and 4th graders, where we read the book, and the book doesn't talk about suicide. It talks only about mental health and coping skills and how to take care of your physical self and your mental self. It talks about how to find your trusted adults, what are the qualities in a trusted adult, and the back of the book has a couple activities as well as a mental health plan for kids to fill out on their own, to fill out with their caregivers, with their parents, with their teachers, whoever it is. So that the next time that they're feeling really distraught, really frustrated, angry, anxious, worried, whatever it is, that they have a plan that they can look back on and remember that, like, oh, when I'm feeling down, I know that I like to journal, or I like to read books, or I like to go for a walk with my pet or my parents. I like to go for a bike ride. So they get to identify these coping skills and write them down somewhere so that it's constantly accessible to them. And that's how we get them to practice. So for a lot of kids, I always say the things you already enjoy doing are coping skills. We just need to start thinking about them as coping skills. Video games for a lot of kids, it is a coping skill. It's how they're able to debrief and decompress. Should it be monitored? And, every parent has their way of handling this. Yes, of course. But for some kids, that's what they enjoy, and that's what's going to bring joy into their lives. So we should, encourage them to practice these coping skills so that they have them at their disposal when they're needed. So not mentioned in the slide, I guess I'll go back really quick if it lets me. So this is for 3rd and 4th graders. And for a long time, we were also doing this program with 5th graders, but we got a lot of feedback from the 5th graders that this book about a dog was too childish and babyish for them. So this past school year, or not even, I guess since January, I've developed a similar concept of the program, but I've just taken away the book really. And I do worksheets with 5th grade classes, and they're art-based projects. So we, again, we talk about what our coping skills are. We talk about how we feel when we're feeling down, when we're feeling stressed and worried. And then I have them identify where in their body they feel these feelings. We do a worksheet together. We talk about all the different ways that they feel and express emotions. And then we talk about coping skills. We talk about things that they like to do by themselves, things that they would like to do with others. We talk about a safe place for them, a place that they can go to make them happy. And we talk about trusted adults in their life. So it's very much the same topics that we do with the 3rd and 4th graders. We just zhuzhed the format a little bit to make it more appealing to them. And then for 6th through 12th grades, we do the SOS program. So SOS has 2 formats for middle schoolers, so 6th through 8th. We talk about warning signs or signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, and how to talk to a friend if you're noticing that they're down, that they're struggling. So again, it talks about trusted adults, it talks about the coping skills, but this one gets to really start to use the language of anxiety, depression, and give them the information that they can hopefully use to then have a conversation with adults when the time comes that they need to let someone know that they're struggling, or let an adult know that they're worried about a friend who is struggling. And then the high school format, so 9th through 12th grade, then we start talking about suicide, and we talk about the warning signs of suicide. We still talk about depression and anxiety, but it's just a little bit more advanced with a little bit more information about suicide in particular. And both of these programs, I should add, are evidence-based programs, which MHA is really honored and happy to have and be able to provide to districts. This is just more about the SLS program. So we watch a series of video clips, and the video clips, again, because there's a middle school program and a high school program, the video clips are geared towards those programs. So what I mean, each video clip starts with a real life story. So a person talking about their mental health or their, struggle with suicide, whether it's past suicide attempt or just suicidal thoughts. So for the middle schoolers, it's just mental health struggles. And for the high schoolers, we hear about suicide stories. And then it's followed by a role play with, again, youth that are similar to the targeted age, whether it's the middle school or the high school videos, with them talking to their friends or noticing the things about their friends that made them worried. So in this little clip that you see, this little thumbnail here in the middle, the one boy was talking about how he's so angry and he doesn't want to be home anymore because his dad moved out, and he's talking about how lucky the other kid is to have both parents live at home, and how, like, what's the point of doing well in school? It's not like my dad's around to see it anyway. It's not like he cares. So really just talking about his struggle of feeling lonely and sad, angry and depressed, but in different language. So the role plays are really supposed to help them hear and see what a friend might say or what it might actually sound like. And then lastly, we're just going to run through a couple of resources. And again, if you have a specific question as far as resources go, I'm happy to help right now, or maybe it's something that I have to research and get back to you via email. But the suicide prevention website is something that MHA has put together. So you can go through our regular website, so mhainspire.org. And then up at the top under suicide prevention, way down at the bottom of the page, there's further links. So there's this one, and there's another one. I think the URL is youarenotalone.mhainspire.org. But both of them offer resources to different type of mental health lines, to national and state resources, as well as local resources. So this is something for you to have, or for you to look through with a young person in your life. The Not Okay app is this great function. So with the Not Okay app, basically, if you have a child in your life who you are worried about, the Not Okay app is similar to having like a mental health plan. So on the app, you put in emergency contacts, and if the person is feeling not okay, they press a button on the app and it immediately notifies the local authorities. I believe you can set it to also notify the local psychiatric or crisis response team, and then as well as whoever those emergency contacts are. So there's a couple different settings. I've actually never looked at the app or have it downloaded. So this is really just information that I got off the website. So if you look into it, from what Tracy tells me, it's just a really good way if you have someone who you feel is struggling a lot, or maybe you have a child moving away to college and you just want a way for them to be able to let you know they're not okay without having to call you or text you. This is the app that we suggest. So this QR code, I'll leave it up while I talk for a couple minutes. If you want to scan it, this is a directory of basic support services in Morris County. So everything from youth services to adults, psychiatric, geriatric, whether it's homelessness, employment support, all those kinds of things. This brochure has all of it. So feel free to scan the QR code. If you miss it, or if the QR code's not working, let me know and I can send the QR codes in an email for them to circulate later. So I'll give it another couple seconds in case anyone else wants to scan. And then on the next, I believe we have another QR code. So this is crisis resources in particular. So again, crisis, when we say crisis, we are talking about someone being a danger to themselves, the others, or property. So whether it's someone's having suicidal ideation, maybe and needs to be admitted immediately to get treatment, or if someone is in a psychotic episode, or if they are just acting out aggressively. Perform Care is the number for New Jersey for youth, and then 988 is the crisis number for everyone, really. But if you do have a person under the age of 21, I believe, Perform Care is the number to call. So again, I'll leave that up there for a second in case anyone else wants to scan that in case of crisis. And then in case you're thinking to yourself, I'm not worried about a crisis in my home or my family, it's definitely worth saving these resources in case someone someone else's child, or maybe one of your children's friends is going through something. Having these resources can only be a beneficial. So it's worth scanning and having them instead of me giving everyone paper and then papers get lost. Wasn't there a slide between this? No, okay. So these are just some more youth resources. So 988 is the number that replaced the suicide lifeline number. So now I can't even tell you what the suicide lifeline number was. So thank goodness they changed it to 988. So it's much easier to remember. It's more easily accessible. But the way I describe this, it kind of still works as almost like a dispatching. So if you call and you tell them that someone, your child just made a suicide attempt, they're going to tell you what hospital is closest to you. They can connect you to the crisis mobile response teams, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of figure out, depending on where you are, what are the right people and what are the right numbers to call. But this number is still useful, even if you're not in a crisis. If you or someone again, this is not just for youth, just need someone to talk to, you can call 988 and let them know that you want a mental health support line. And again, they'll figure out based on your demographics, your age, and all this type of stuff, what's the right mental health support line for you. So they work for both crisis and non-crisis situations, but there are other numbers to keep in mind. Second floor is the number, is the talk number for New Jersey, specifically New Jersey youth. So if you call second floor, it just gives you someone to talk to, someone to vent to, someone to process with. And they also help with crisis, but technically they're a non-crisis line. The Trevor Lifeline does work as crisis. Trevor Lifeline was developed for LGBTQ youth particularly, and they're available through call or text. And then the crisis text line works in conjunction with 988. So if you don't want to call, you can text talk or you can text home to 741-741. Again, this is for crisis. So if you or your youth are ever in a situation where they're not able to talk on the phone, or a lot of youth just rather not be on the phone, there is also a texting option. And then we have Teen Connect, which is something that we are really proud of at MHA. We put this together. It's been running since November of this past year of 2022. And then we just started the texting option in January, yes. So this is non-crisis support. So this is if, again, a young person in your life just needs someone to talk to, someone to vent to. We're available through call or text Monday through Friday, 5 to 10 p.m. And what's really cool about our line is that it's run by youth and it's for youth. So we hire young people ages 18 to 24. These are trained people. They go through mental health first aid training, as well as other confidentiality and protective trainings and policies that we have. And they are the ones who answer the call or respond to the text message. And the idea behind this is that so a young person has someone close in their age to talk to, someone who can hopefully relate to them, someone who is closer to that experience of like entering high school or entering college or feeling isolated from friends and family. And we are really proud of this, and we've gotten really good responses thus far. So if you have someone who might benefit from this, again, even if it's not your own child, if there's someone else in your life, you never know who you run into, feel free to scan the QR code. What's cool about the QR code is it gives you an option to actually save the contact information into your phone, or your child can even save the contact information into their phone. So when it comes time to call or text, you're not scrambling and looking for a flyer or the QR code or the website. The information will be saved. The only thing I like to point out is that the calling number and the texting number is different. So it's just something to be mindful if you save it onto your phone. And these are a couple more teen lines. Again, I can share these PowerPoints or at least these numbers if needed. But these are for teens specifically. So the teen line has a call and text option, and they're open 9 p.m. from 1 a.m. So they're really like an overnight option. Our line isn't crisis, and I don't think this one is either. I think this is just for talk, but we're only open, our lines are only open 5 to 10. So if you're needed a later night option, there is one. The teen tech support line is another one that New Jersey has to offer, and then the youth line. So these are all teen lines. If you ever need any of these resources, or maybe you're thinking, I as an adult need a line to call or text to, you can actually call 211 and let them know that you're looking for a mental health support line or a talk line, a warm line, and they will guide you in the right direction as well in case you're ever in any other need. So I'm going to stop talking for now, but if you would like to reach out to us, if you have any questions, again, Tracy is the director of our suicide prevention program, and is like very well versed in the field. So she can definitely be a resource if you ever wanted to call or email, or if you had a question for me, I'm happy to help or answer in any way I can, or at least point you in the right direction, give you the right information. So that is my email address. And that is our Parsippany office call line and my extension, as well as Tracy's extension. So feel free to take a picture. Again, if it's necessary, I'm pretty sure I'll double check with Tracy, but I can send these slides out.
Emma,
Yes.
Hi, it's Christine. I just want to say thank you for being here and for your amazing presentation.
Absolutely.
Of such a hard subject. But there is a question that I have here. Someone is asking, may I ask that question now?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it says, hello, my adult child attempted suicide. He would mask his suicidal thoughts by acting happy. So how can we know what he's really thinking?
That's a really common question. It's also a really common thing for young people to do, again, because they feel like by talking about it, they'll feel like a burden or a bother in their family's life. So I think the best way to get through to them is just to continuing talking to them and letting them know that you are there for them if and when they're ready to talk. Again, I know that talking about suicide can be really uncomfortable for people, but if you can get through the message that you are willing to be there, you're willing to cry, you're willing to hear all the really difficult things that they might say, that they will understand that you can be that person to listen to their thoughts. I'll also suggest that maybe talking isn't their best conversation tool. So any other form of expression. With young kids, when I used to work with children in foster care system, we had a lot of kids with a lot of big feelings. And one of the recommendations that we would give, especially when parents were struggling, was to open a journal. So the journal becomes a mode of communication between the child and the parent. And this can be with both parents, it can be with one parent, it can be with an older sibling, with, grandma and grandpa, whoever it is. But the idea is that mom or dad, whoever it is, goes into the journal and writes a story or a message, or I was at Target the other day, you won't believe what I saw, and da 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 da. And then you put it in their room and they go in and they add a tidbit about their day, and then they go back and put it in that secret spot. Opening up that conversation can eventually allow the space for those more difficult conversations. So just by allowing them to know that you're there to talk to them about whatever is on their mind, those more difficult conversations, the more difficult emotions and thoughts tend to come through as well. If your child is currently in therapy, I know that it can be a real struggle for parents to be okay with the fact that there is client and therapist confidentiality after a certain age, and that the child can choose to not have the parent updated, informed. But if you can know that the therapist is that trusted person for them, that they're at least talking to things about someone, coming to terms with that on your own is really difficult, but at least now you have a way to say, go to your child and be like, hey, you had therapy today, yesterday, last night, whatever. How did it go? Is there anything that you want to process? Is there anything that I should know? And not really forcing them to tell you, because again, that breaks trust rather than build it. I think the most important thing is to kind of put the ball in a young person's court and allow them to choose if and when and how they're going to talk to you about these things. But the more you open up the doors and let them know that you're okay with talking about these things, you're there to talk about it, you want to hear about it, you're interested, you care about them, you love them, and you're not going to be there to judge or to, minimize, diminish, and question, it's more likely that it'll come through to them naturally rather than you kind of begging and bartering with them to have these conversations. I'm sorry if that's not a black and white answer, kind of like straightforward, but I hope it's helpful.
No, I think that was helpful in that explanation, and I appreciate it. I know I put a synopsis in the answer there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I'll talk slower.
It is helpful. There's a lot of information that you're giving, and it's incredible that there's so many resources, and it's just wonderful that Mental Health Association has spearheaded all of the resources in one space, and I appreciate the QR codes for sure. I know if there's any other questions, people can certainly put them in to the question and the Q&A, or even in the chat, by all means. I do know that this question comes up often, and maybe I can just ask it if it's all right with you, Emma.
For sure, yeah.
How could I get my child into a therapist whereby maybe I'm interested in art therapy or something like that? How do we go about doing that? Where do you start?
For sure. So art therapists aren't always advertising themselves. So that I will say, just being in the field, I've noticed it a lot. So that definitely makes it harder for everyone to find them, unfortunately. But the best option, if you haven't already tried going through your own insurance and very literally looking up art therapy, that might work. I always recommend psychologytoday.com as a resource. I feel that psychologytoday.com is more frequently updated than insurance websites. Again, it's not always 100% as far as, if they're taking new clients and what insurances they take and all that, but it is a way to look up. You can literally look up art therapists, you put in your zip code, and you can check off what insurance you have. So it only shows people who fill in that those filters. And then I want to say the New Jersey Art Therapy Association, their website has been undergoing a lot of changes and updates. So I know this used to be an option, and I can certainly double check if it still is, but I believe there used to be a Find an Art Therapist tab. Where again, you'd put in your zip code and it would give you a long list of registered art therapists in your area. I will say art therapists in New Jersey are really going through something with licensure and everything right now. So I feel like that's why maybe it's not as often advertised. If you are in the Montclair area, our children's outpatient program does have an art therapist on staff. The only thing with that program is that we only accept Medicaid and Medicare clients. So if that fits in to your description, then I know that we have at least one art therapist, if not more, in that program. So that can also be an option.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Yeah, I know Luis has mentioned our Butler library director. This will be recorded, and we're so appreciative of that ability, because it was jam-packed with such incredible information. Yeah, so thank you. And I know we're a little over the time, but yeah, it's so important, this subject, and really you helped us really understand that there are so many resources and that we're not alone. And really thank you so very much, Emma. And I won't speak for Vicky, because I'm sure she'll have something to say too, unless
for sure.
I'm sure she's there.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. My
No worries.
video's not working. I just wanted to say thank you again, Emma, for all the information. We this was recorded, so we will, and I would like the PowerPoint because we will update it on the Butler Public Schools website so that the
For sure.
information is available for whoever would like to look at it.
Okay, great. And that's probably an easier way for them to get access to all those phone numbers. But so I guess just my closing remark, I think what you just said, Christine, just triggered a thought. So for any parents or again, just caregivers in general, whether it's a niece, nephew, grandchild, whoever, you are not alone as the adult in this child's life. So there are also supports for people. If you feel like you're struggling with your child, with your family, and with suicide in your family. So know that you're not alone and there are people for you to talk to as well. And if you're interested in different type of support groups, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a list of support groups, both locally, but many of them due to COVID have continued to be virtual. So that is also an option in case you have lost someone to suicide or you have someone in your life who has attempted suicide and continues to struggle.
All right, Emma, thank you so much. Thank you to
guys.
everyone for coming again. Thank you, Mayor Martinez. I know that you are out there listening as well. We hope that you have a great night and we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Emma. Have a good night.
You too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. I'm going to end it now.
Thanks, Louis.
Okay.
Thanks, Louise. Are you?
Yeah, bye, guys.
Thanks.